Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. You know, one of my favorite things to do on this podcast and on our site is showcase MBA programs that might be less well known or a little bit off the radar compared to the mainstream kind of MBA market. But I love showcasing these programs because many times young programs have the freedom and opportunity to really innovate in the business education space. They can start with a clean slate and almost reimagine what the MBA could be and fit it to today's market. That's why I was really excited to have this conversation with Sean Ferguson, who is the Associate Dean and Director of the MBA program at the Asia School of Business, which is based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And it was formed as a partnership between the MIT School Sloan of Management and the Central Bank of Malaysia. They just graduated their first class, so they're a really young program. But it's just so interesting to hear what they're trying to build out at the Asian School of Business, or ASB as they call it. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Those of you who are considering, working in Southeast Asia or on frontier markets, I think this could be a really interesting program for you. And Sean is just exceptionally open about what they're trying to do with this program, which is very much like a startup, in my opinion, which gets me pumped up. Remember, you can get free school selection help at touchmba.com. And yeah, let's get straight to my conversation with Sean. Here we go. All right, everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the Touch MBA podcast. I'm really excited to have our next guest on the show. This is the second time he's appeared on our podcast. It's my pleasure to introduce the Associate Dean and Director of the MBA program for the Asia School of Business, based in Malaysia, Sean Ferguson. Sean, welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast.
Thanks for reconnecting, Darren. It's good to be on here again.
I'm so excited to learn about this program that you're helping to lead. What do you think makes the ASB MBA unique?
I think for us at ASB, one of the things that makes us unique is really our approach to curriculum. We are an action learning-based curriculum, which is a fundamental part of what we do as a school. And so we have this belief that in the knowledge era, there's too much information and knowledge out there for us to teach it to students, teach them the body of knowledge in the universe. And so our philosophy is teach the students how to learn so that they can learn to do. And within the action learning context, students take what they learned in the classroom and we give them the opportunity each semester they're in the program to go on site with one of our 120 corporate partners and do a different project as a team. And so in the first semester, all of our students do a 4-week project with our corporate partners. It's a semester-long project, but they're on site with our corporate partners for 4 weeks. And what they do with this project is, like, the first week they go in, they kind of scope out what the project is and what's the work to be done. Then they come back for another couple of weeks to do all the work. And then at the end, in the last 4 weeks on site, they present and summarize their findings and such. And we believe this is a really good way for them to take the theory from the classroom and apply it in a real world and impactful, meaningful way. And with this, not only do they learn how to apply the technical skills in a meaningful way, but they also, because they're doing this in different cultural contexts, they're building up soft skills that are helpful for them as well. A lot of times what we see with MBA graduates, it's not the technical skills that are really preventing them from being successful. It's also the soft skills. And so each semester they do these projects all over Southeast Asia. So while Malaysia was the first one for everyone, which you can have in the second semester, someone can do a project in the Philippines. And then in the third semester, someone does a project in Indonesia. And in the fourth semester, maybe someone's doing a project in Myanmar or somewhere like that. And so they build up this huge cross-cultural savvy by going into all these different places that really makes them market ready and successful.
And how is this integrated into the curriculum? What I found so interesting was when I was researching for this podcast, I couldn't easily find a list of courses, right, that you traditionally get, you know? So I'm wondering how the format works. Like when they are off-site, they're not still taking classes, clearly, right? Or how does that work?
No. So when they're off-site, it's all about the project, working with the faculty member and our business coach, who's a practitioner from industry. So, but when they're back in school, they take week-long courses throughout the semester. So one week we might have an organizational behavior course. Another week we might have the marketing core course. So most of our courses are week-long, and this also helps us because about 50% of our courses are taught by MIT faculty, and this week-long format for a course makes it easier for them to integrate into our curricular experience that includes action learning.
I see. And so how much choice do your students get in these action learning projects in terms of their team and their corporate partner?
So we have this bidding process that students are participate in to select the courses that the projects that they're most interested in. And just in our last round of projects, I think it was like 85 or 90% of our students got one of their first two choices. And so right now we're about, 40 students in a particular class, and we might have 10 or 12 projects that we have to staff, and we might have double the choices, right? And so students say, okay, I'm interested in this tech company from Indonesia, or this hospitality company from Thailand, or this bank in the Philippines, or something like that. Then they allocate points, and then we kind of go in there and do the massaging of the process in order to kind of map the best teams together. So we also consider, like, what's the skill set of the team, what's the background of the team, that kind of thing.
Got it. It's very clear. And is there a focus in the curriculum as well on Southeast Asian business, or is it mainly through the action learning projects that the students are getting exposure to these cultures?
Right. So I would say our in-class kind of traditional coursework that I was talking about earlier that we do over a weeks at a time, those are pretty consistent, have a global view of things, not too different than what you would see from the top business schools in Europe or the United States. But it's really on the ground in action learning where you really develop the Southeast Asia perspective, because a lot of the market research they do is related to this region, because that's what's most relevant for the corporate partner.
Yes.
So that's where that perspective is influenced. And then in the second year, this past year, we just launched electives, and we've had electives that are more geared towards Southeast Asia. So, for example, we had this all ASEAN digital marketing class focused on ASEAN brands and such. So there it's a mix, right? But I think it's a good blend of global and regional perspective that we try to build into the classroom. And then a lot of times what you have is that because you're in Southeast Asia, and we've had a lot of new market strategy projects for action learning, when you're trying to create growth strategies, even though it's focused on the Southeast Asian market, you're always looking at global benchmarks and comparisons to see, okay, maybe this is a strategy that worked in Latin America, or maybe this is a strategy that worked in China 10 or 20 years ago, and maybe that serves as an initial cut for what a strategy would be in this part of the world. So you get a ton of exposure to many different areas here, but I think there's nothing like this in the world where you get the on-the-ground exposure.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I probably should have asked you this first, but could we take a step back and could you just tell me a bit more about the founding of the Asia School of Business and kind of it's standing in Malaysia, right? Because it is a new business school, new on the scene, relatively new, I should say. And I know, Sean, that last time I interviewed you, it was when you were with HKUST MBA, and I know you've worked at Rice University as well. So I'd be curious about the business school itself. Like, what should applicants know about Asian School of Business?
Yeah, so we're going into our fourth year of existence, and we're a partnership between the Central Bank of Malaysia and the MIT Sloan School of Management. And the genesis of this business school started from the central bank and wanting to elevate the human capital in this part of the world. And they felt if Malaysia is going to make the next jump to advanced economy status, it needs more world-class institutions. And it's not just business schools. There's a lot of different institutions that, develop advanced economies needs in order to establish themselves. And in this case, the bank and key leadership at the bank had reached out to MIT to talk about their, thoughts about creating this initiative in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, outside of your kind of traditional hubs in Singapore, Hong Kong, and mainland China. And they felt there was a need for something like this in this part of the world. And we launched our first class in 2016, and so they just graduated this past March, and so things are going fast. And now we're on to our second class, and they're graduating in a few months now. And so it's been an evolving process. And what we tell students is that if you're kind of frontier minded and you want to go where business is going in the future, Asia is the place to be. It's not really an experience that's for anybody. The MBA is still evolving in Asia and this part of the world. But I think if you have the ability to kind of handle like ambiguity, if you can build relationships, there's a tremendous opportunity for MBA students out here in Asia.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to my next question, which is, you mentioned that the MBA is evolving in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, but I also heard you say that ASB, you guys have over 120 corporate partners that you're working with to send students to. So
right.
I'm wondering how the MBA, if we could take one step even further back, is viewed in Malaysia, because I know a lot of your students end up working there, and if that's how that's different than, say, a more developed country like the U.S.
Yeah, so I think in Malaysia, if you take a step back, so I think the U.S. is probably where the MBA has the most awareness. People appreciate the value. There's a clear market set in terms of salary and things like that. And then, as you mentioned earlier, I worked in Hong Kong at HKUST earlier. I would say in Hong Kong and Singapore, these developed, these advanced Asian economies and these regional hubs, they have the market has a pretty good appreciation of the MBA, but it's not far and wide, right? And so not every company understands the role of the MBA. And then when you get down to like Malaysia, it's still kind of a new product in this market. I would say below Hong Kong and Singapore. So it's probably 2 or 3 rungs below where the U.S. is. And so what we're finding, though, is that, the forward-thinking countries in Southeast Asia and Malaysia, a lot of the key leaders there have been in regional roles and global roles. And so they have a sense of, this talent is crucial for growing the organization and kind of capitalizing on the growth opportunities in this part of the world. And so what I feel like in our partner group, these are people who are looking to get this kind of talent to move ahead faster than maybe their competitors in this industry. And I think when you think about the growth in this part of the world, human capital is absolutely fundamental to kind of achieving the growth. And I think, when just in talking to recruiters over the last, 6 years being in Asia, there is a need for like more talent that is strategically oriented, can take a general view of things, right? And not just look at things from a functional perspective. I think sometimes in Asia, people can be the talent has been put in very narrow and functionally oriented roles. And so sometimes there's this, the cross-functional discipline is missing across companies, right? And so if you're just thinking of, if you got a supply chain guy and then an HR guy and then a finance guy only thinking in those particular buckets, you're not going to be able to bring everything together to capture the most value for an enterprise. And I think with us, all of our projects tend to be interdisciplinary in nature, and so it really helps our students bring all those elements together, right? So you can come up with a digital transformation strategy, but how are you going to finance it? Where are you going to get the human capital that has the ability to take it to the next level in this part of the world? So that's what we kind of think is where our value proposition really lies in Asia, and I think in the near and long term, and these 120 partners have found our value proposition really compelling. And the Action Learning Program that I talked to you about earlier is a way for us to kind of demonstrate our product's functionality in the marketplace.
Right, exactly. And is it, given that your students work on so many action learning projects over the course of 2 years, is there an internship requirement, or do students go out and get internships?
Yeah, so we have our summer, we're a 2-year program, which is rather unique in Asia. And in that summer, we have a summer associate program. And so we're during the school year we have each semester an action learning project, and typically there are 4 or 5 person teams. The summer associate program is kind of like it's a individual action learning project, right? So unlike other schools where students just go out and do an internship and come back, our students are actually still required they're doing an internship, but there's faculty supervision and business coach supervision to kind of help make sure we put the internship in the proper context and we extract the key learnings from that from an academic perspective. And I think that's one of the things that makes our summer experience a little bit different than other MBA programs.
Yeah. And well, okay, there's so many things I want to ask, but let's continue onward. So academically, where do you think, ASB stands out? Is it, again, along this action learning projects that we're talking about?
Yeah, the action learning projects are great. I think they're fundamental. And so when people ask us, like, so what's in your curriculum? And, people typically want to see a laundry list of classes that are in our curriculum. And for us, we're like, action learning is our curriculum, and the classes support action learning, right? And so I think that's a different perspective than most other schools. And so, yes, we have finance. Yes, we have strategy. Yes, we have marketing. Yes, we have leadership. We have all those classes, but we're not teaching the classes to teach the classes. We're teaching the classes so that they can support the action learning process, which we think makes the whole learning experience more robust and meaningful to students.
Yeah, it's almost like a part-time MBA that's more closely monitored. Would you, or in the sense that everything like your students are working on, is hopefully reflected upon and has a critical class or academic component to it, but they're working. That's what it sounds like to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a way to look at it. I mean, I think, I've overseen part-time MBA programs for the last 13 years. And one of the benefits there and why a lot of companies have been supportive of those programs is because students can take what they learn on Monday or Tuesday or on the weekend in class and bring it into the workplace real time, right? And I think here, action learning is a similar way. And I think, it does have these kind of working elements to it, but I think a better way to look at it is maybe like engineering or something like that, right? Where they actually have a lab to go test the ideas and do stuff, right? And I think that's what, I think that's maybe what business schools have been missing relative to, say, medical schools or engineering schools and things of that nature. There's not really a place to apply these things. And what makes ASB unique is that they do it 4 times during the school year, once per semester. Then they also do it over summer. Whereas, when I used to work at Rice University, we would do an action learning once during the whole program. And one of the that one time was a tremendous effort, right? And so for us to do this 4 or 5 times here at ASB, it's a tremendous undertaking and an investment in the students. And so, yeah, it definitely is like a working process. But I think a better way to think about it is it's a business school lab.
Yeah, love that. And so I think this is such a key question. I ask it in all my interviews with schools, but particularly with ASB. Why do you think candidates should get their MBA in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia? Right? It's typically not on the map of most MBA applicants.
So Malaysia is an interesting intersection of all of Asia. You have the Malay population and community, which is kind of a representation of the ethnic demographic of Southeast Asia. Then you have Indians, and then you have the Chinese population here. So it kind of cuts across all the major cultures and groups of Asia. And so you're on the front line. And when our students come here, I'm so impressed because you guys are frontier minded. You're on the front line of where things are going on in Asia. And, having lived in Hong Kong for 5 years and, been to Singapore a lot, those places are amazing cities, but they're kind of bubbles in their own sense, right? So you're not on the front line. You're very much kind of in these regional headquarters, and you're not getting your hands dirty in the same way that you would in like a Kuala Lumpur. And so Malaysia is, I think, one of the best representatives of what's going on economically in Southeast Asia. Every time students come here for, say, an admit weekend, or we have guests. A couple of weeks ago, we hosted Stanford and University of Texas, who were doing their study abroad trips here, and they were blown away by the quality of the infrastructure, the proficiency of English, but yet how close you are to what's really going on from a growth perspective in Asia. And while I think Hong Kong and Singapore are great, I think Malaysia is very well developed comparably to those guys, but you're right on the front line. And, being an American, the analogy I make is like in the early 1900s, they used to say, if you're looking for opportunity, son, go west, young man. And I think here, I tell people, come on out east and see what's going on in this part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of that infrastructure, I saw that your tuition actually includes accommodation.
Right.
And it sounds like the accommodation is quite luxurious, but can you tell me a bit more about like where the students are housed and how that campus is.
So happy to talk about that a little bit, Darren. So as I mentioned earlier, we're a partnership with the Central Bank of Malaysia. And so right now we're in the process of building our own campus right across the street, but we're housed in kind of the bank's, our classes take place in one of the bank's kind of educational and knowledge management facilities. And then our students stay at this place called Lanai Kijan, which is basically the central bank's hotel. And so when they come visit Malaysia's central bank and such. And so our students are fortunate to be able to stay at this facility. So it's pretty nice. It's not what you would think of in a traditional dorm or what have you. But for us, the on-campus living experience and having the students live together is fundamental to us pulling off this action learning experience. Having them being close. If you've been to any city in Southeast Asia, sometimes traffic can be bad, so we wanted to remove that element from the process. And because whether it's in the classroom or for their action learning projects, typically throughout the year they have two main teams that they work with, we want them to be close because it is a very intense educational experience. And so, it's very group oriented. So that living together is fundamental for us.
Absolutely. So, and then in terms of the admissions side of things, what are you really looking for from applicants to this program?
So I think we have this mantra that we're looking for the unconventional and extraordinary, and people who generally want to change the world. So I can truly say we have no absolutes in how we view the world. So we consider all things like other schools, but then we we consider work experience, GMAT, prior transcript, interviews, recommendations, all of that. But I think what's different for us is we look for things that are really exceptional about the individual and convey impact. And how do they project out in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And so, people are always like, well, if I don't have any business experience, does that matter? And what I tell them is that it doesn't matter if you do have business experience. If you're not making impact in your organization, or in your context, then you're probably not the right kind of person here. Because if you're coming to Asia and you're going to be on this frontier, you have to be an impact-oriented individual, a self-starter, someone who has the initiative to make things happen out of nothing, right? And we're looking for evidence in that in the application process. And, everyone's context is different, and we're super international as a school. So we take anywhere from 35 to 45 students now at this stage of our growth curve. And we typically have 18 different countries. 70% of our students are international. And so with that, we bring perspectives from all over the world. So that's important. So like in this current class, we have someone from Botswana and Bosnia, from Ireland, from, Chile, from Brazil, from Kenya, South Africa, so we also have, focus, like in our mission, we're looking for people. Our mission talks about, creating principled and transformative leaders for the emerging world with a focus on Asia. And so we also are interested in students who come from these parts of the world who want to help grow and impact other emerging world countries outside of the region and within the region.
And could you walk us through your application process? Just give us a quick overview of it.
Yeah, so it's pretty typical application process. We're looking for things like your leadership presence, your independence of thought. And this comes out in the essays that people do for us. There's also a video that students have to share. That gives us a little bit of insight in your personality. Then students will be required to give us their academic transcripts, submit a CV and a resume that articulates their professional work experience. They'll need a couple of recommendations. And then after we get that information, then we see if you're a fit for an interview, and then we conduct an interview with one of our leadership team or admissions team. So that's fundamentally our application process there. But again, I think it's those things. Like I said, they're pretty standard, but it's how we evaluate someone that I think makes it different, right? And it's are they frontier minded, right? Are they going to be a fit in Asia? Here, there's a lot of ambiguity with things. And so if we get a sense in the application process that you may struggle with ambiguity, Asia might not be the best place for you. But on the flip side, if you struggle with ambiguity and in the application process you articulate that this is the way I want to grow and you demonstrate this self-awareness, then we're like, okay, we want to help you bring that skill out. So the evaluation, I think, is really the critical piece of this, right?
No, absolutely. And so those things that you're looking for, frontier-minded, able to deal with ambiguity, looking to impact emerging Asia and emerging markets, principled, do these things, but that doesn't exclude people from, developed markets to apply to your program, right?
Absolutely not.
I just want to make that clear.
Yep. So I would say about a third to 40% of our students are from outside of Asia, right? And I think in that mix, half are from developed markets, half are from developing markets. So we're open to all students. And what we really want to see is a hunger for being out in the front line of where the economic transformation and future of the world is happening. I think I'll just use myself and a lot of my colleagues here on our team. We're super diverse as well. We have faculty and senior leadership who have come out here because from the United States, from Europe, different parts of the world, because they want to be where the future is going, right? And so I always tell people, throughout the history of man, people, my parents went to the United States. Why? Because they were looking to opportunity in the future. And so when I came out to Asia, they're like, why are you coming out to Asia? You have it great in the United States, a good job and everything. I'm like, I'm just doing what you guys did. You guys were looking for opportunity and where the future was going. And I think that's what, the kind of students, regardless of where you're from, if that's how you kind of see the world, this is why ASB is a great place for you.
Got it. Crystal clear. And how defined do applicants need to be with their post-MBA career goals when they're applying to you guys?
I think they need to be pretty articulate and thoughtful about it. I would say this, Darren, after being in this business for about 13, 14 years, what people say in the admissions process and what they want to do, if I held folk accountable to that, nobody would graduate, right?
Yeah.
But because, and particularly with our school, right, because we expose you to so much during action learning, like, someone could come in and say, I want to be a management consultant. And then they do this really cool digital transformation project with Procter & Gamble, or they do this amazing supply chain project with Intel or what have you. And then they're like, wow, I don't know what I want to do because I had such a good time on all these projects, and these projects may have been very multifunctional or interdisciplinary. I got to use finance. I got to use marketing. I got to use strategy. It could potentially confuse some people, right? And make them like, I don't know where I want to go because I've enjoyed doing all these different things. So in the application process, though, what we want to see is that you're thoughtful about what you want to do, right? And so if you're like, I want to go into this industry because of X, Y, and Z, and I've done these things that have kind of built up to help me get to this point, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for reflection, introspection, and such, so that we know that you can think deeply about the road ahead, right? And the other thing that, we're looking for is for people to help us understand how you're going to deal with the challenges that come up in this part of the world. Because sometimes Asia can be brutal, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The process, because there's not really widespread appreciation for the MBA. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to say, I think MBAs are worthless, right? And it's not because MBAs are worthless, because that person's never really dealt with an MBA, right? Or saw the value that an MBA could bring. And so we also need students who can kind of push through in the process as well. So we're looking for that kind of resilience and grit also.
Yeah, I mean, are there any other characteristics that really get you excited about candidates?
Yeah, people who, I think the biggest thing is like, I guess, risk taker. I don't know if that's the best word, but not afraid to challenge the status quo, right? So we have all these people who, are coming over here, they're packing up their bags. And for a lot of our students, some of their parents don't even know where Kuala Lumpur is, right? Or where is that at? And so the sense of purpose that our students have about coming over here and being a part of this kind of movement for economic transformation and being in a hub of innovation for this massive market of 700 million people here in Southeast Asia. I think, that's those are some of the other things that I really love. And I reflect, and I'm like, man, I wish I had the foresight that some of these students had today, because a lot of our students, their generation has seen their parents laid off. The covenants of these 25-year contracts no longer exist working at an employer. And so they're really taking their professional career into their own hands. And a lot of times people in my business, we have these conferences and we say millennials this and millennials that. And I think millennials they're just questioning the status quo, which if I was a parent, I would want my kid to say, you know what, why should I do this for you? Or I think there's a better course of action for me. And I'm looking for a different blend of what I get out of work. I want to be on the innovation side of things, maybe impacting things beyond just this market. Maybe I'm impacting this part of the world. And I think that's really admirable about this generation of students.
No, absolutely. And I think kind of tied in with that, rankings are such a force in the business school world. Like, what do you tell applicants when they ask you, you guys are really young, and what's your plan with rankings, and how does that all play out?
Yeah, so I think for us, rankings, we get it. They're a tool in the market for students. I think for us, we don't have any rankings, but what we do have are things that I think provide tangible value in the marketplace, and kind of strategically how we think about things. There's a few inflection points for us. So the first thing we're trying to do is really make sure our students get jobs in the marketplace that are comparable to the top ranked schools in this part of the world, right? And so we look at, we actually look at the rankings as well. And so we say, okay, the salaries that we think our students deserve are in line with school X, Y, or Z in Asia, right? And so our approach to career services is built around kind of delivering at that level. The other thing that I tell people is that our Action Learning program is something that's totally unique in this region. So if you really look at like a lot of how business schools approach companies, it's like, hey, will you hire our student? Oh, if not, we move on to the next company. But at ASB, we have deep partnerships with the companies because they're doing these Action Learning projects with our students, right? So it's not just a, hey, will you hire our students? We're helping the company solve problems, bring value, make an impact. And I think the level of engagement that we have with companies is unparalleled to what I've seen in Asia with other schools, right? Really hands-on, back and forth with companies. That's unique. And at the end of the day, like, say if you look at the Financial Times rankings, that ranking is all driven, 40% of it is maybe driven by salary and career outcomes. And so our Action Learning program is built to kind of address the career side of things, make our students market ready so that they can compete in the marketplace with the best schools in the region. And in common markets, we've performed comparably to, we don't have a huge sample size, right? But if you look at some of the top schools in this region, when we've been in the same market with them, our salary productivity has been the same as those schools. So we feel really good about that. Long term, our plan is absolutely to be ranked. And one of the things that we're doing is, as we get the career outcomes right, that's kind of our first thing that we can control and bring credibility to the marketplace. Then after that, we're in the process of working on accreditation. So you can't be ranked until you're accredited. And you need at least 2 classes to kind of initiate the accreditation process. So we're working on that. So then once you're accredited, then you can be ranked. And then once you're ranked, then you can really start to move up the rankings level. So I would say if we were a stock, I'm pretty confident Warren Buffett or the great investors would pick ASB for upside in the future.
Yeah, and having worked at a young business school myself, I remember just how thorough that whole process is in terms of the accreditation and graduating classes of a certain size and all that.
Can I add one more point to that?
Yes.
Too? I think another important piece is that we're a partnership with MIT, right? And so MIT Sloan, and while we're not MIT Sloan, we have MIT DNA, right? And so, like I said earlier, 50% of our classes have world-class MIT faculty teaching in there. Also, at the end of the first year, right before they go into their summer associate program, we do a month-long immersion in MIT where we take 4 courses there. And so, MIT, as a very active co-partner with Bank Nagara, is certifying that this is a quality experience that is aligned with the values and the approach that MIT takes to management education, right? And so there's not too many schools that can bring more to the table than MIT. And so I think that in itself should provide a reassurance to the marketplace that, hey, this is a legitimate and credible program with deep engagement from one of the best programs in the world. So,
crystal clear. Yeah. And if we could talk about scholarships now, could you let us know about roughly what percentage of your class gets scholarships and scholarship amounts and how applicants can improve their chances there?
Yeah, so one of the things for us is that we want who we want when it comes to the students who are coming to our program. And so we're very aggressive with scholarships. All of our students have received scholarships in the program. And it's really about how strong your application is that determines the extent, the strength of scholarship that you get in the program. And, you know, we have to do this in the interim because we don't have rankings or accreditation yet. And then people may view this as a risk. We don't see it as a risk, but we understand the realities of the marketplace and how sometimes that could be a concern for students. Also, you know, for us, business schools and the career outcomes are directly correlated to the quality of students that you get into the program. And so that goes back to what I talked about earlier. We want who we want because we want to make sure we get the kind of students that we feel like can be successful in this marketplace, in this part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, do stuff like GMAT scores play a big role, GPAs?
Yeah, we take a holistic approach, right? And so we look at GMAT scores. GMAT's not required, but it is helpful, right? And so if you have, you know, the GMAT, one of the advantages of it is that it does provide something that it gives you the ability to look at like for like across many different markets. But that said, what we've really been investing in is figuring out ways to also evaluate your impact in many different ways, right? So maybe you don't have a GMAT score, but maybe you went to the best school in Turkmenistan, right? So that may mean something to us, right? Or if you're an engineer, right, from the top school in your country, maybe that's reassuring about your quantitative ability for us, right? So it's all how you put the total package together. Or, you know, the video really gives us some insight in how we can look at the individual in advance of, say, an interview, and we're like, man, this guy, maybe their GPA wasn't the best, but when you hear the story, the conviction, and the passion, it's at least worth an interview for us to dig deeper and assess. So I think you know, those are the real critical parts of how we evaluate people. No one thing stands out. It's a collection of different things, right? You know, your independence of thought, your entrepreneurial ability. This doesn't mean entrepreneurial in the sense of will you start up a company, but it's kind of like how industrious you are, that kind of thing. Your presence, all those things come into play, and that's what we're trying to assess in the admissions process.
I mean, this might sound like quite a vague question, but are there certain values that you're looking for from your students? Because it sounds like to me impact is kind of the key overall, you know, trait that you're looking for, and under that comes all these other things. Impact, the ability to impact, you know, in these developing markets. But are there any like values that you're really looking for?
Yes. So we're a product of our values at ASB. One of the things that we hold that near and dear to us, and you can't really get anywhere in the world without having values. And so for us, we talk as a multicultural environment. We talk about respect, caring, and understanding about other people's cultures and point of view. And so we want to see evidence of that in the admissions process. The other thing we want to see is, you know, are you a continuous learner, right? That's one of our key values. And when you're in an academic setting, what we want to see from people is that they're curious, they're hungry, they want to think deeply about the real issues that may be impacting business or society more broadly. So this is another one of the values that we take very seriously. Another one is collaboration, right? And so we do so much teamwork at ASB. We want to know that you can work with people, not just if you're an American. We don't want to just see, can you work with Americans? One of the things that we want to see is, can you work with someone who's from, Mexico City, or someone who's from the Philippines or Vietnam or something like that. And so, that's a fundamental part of who we are. Another piece of, what we're looking for from a values perspective is, student well-being, right? And so do you have the right mental, emotional, social makeup in order to be successful in our environment, right? Because the nature of the program is intense, right? And so one of the things that we're always trying to look for with the students is, how do we put them in the best position to be successful in our program? Because we can have, and I'll give you an example of a 5-week period. You can do a 1-week class on statistics, then another 1-week class on financial accounting. Then, you go to Thailand to go work on an action learning project in Bangkok for 2 weeks. Then you come back and take another class, say strategic management. And so in that period of time, you're constantly on the move, right? You're flying from here to there. We got to make sure that you project to us that you can handle these kind of rigors, right? And then the last thing is that, excellence, right? This is something that we want all of our students to kind of, think about, and never be satisfied with the status quo. We'll always think that we can be better, and we're looking for that kind of evidence. So these 5 things are critical, and we hope there's evidence of this in your application that shows us that you're aligned with the fundamental 5 values of ASB.
Oh, thank you for sharing those. That's fantastic. Very clear. If we can move into the career part of the podcast, what do you think makes ASB special from that career perspective?
Right. So first, right now, I think it's our relationships with the corporate community. I talked about those 120 relationships earlier. So we know people, not just the people who are doing the project, but we know the decision makers at companies. And right now in Asia, everything is about relationships with the corporate community. So that's fundamental for us. And so if you think in a graduating class, we have, like, in this graduating class, we'll have about 35 to 36 students. That's a pretty good ratio of students to corporate partners that we have deep relationships with. I think the other thing is it's a partnership with us. So there's a certain level of effort that students need to expend in this process and be engaged, but we're also there to support and help. And so our career team is really focused on identifying, who you are as an individual, like what are your strengths, what are your motivations and interests, because I think, a lot of times, sometimes people have strengths in areas, but they're not interested in doing work related to that. And for us, we're like, well, we don't want to put you somewhere just because you're good at something if you're not going to be happy there, right? And you're not going to make the employers happy. So we're really trying to get to the core of that. So our ratio of counselors to students is pretty high, and we're very hands-on with the group. The other thing is that what that allows us to do is that we can actually vouch for specific individuals in a way better than other schools that are much larger than us. So when a company comes to us and say, hey, I'm really looking for this, I think more than any school I've ever been at, we're able to say, oh, Johnny would be perfect for you in this role. He's president of this club. His action learning, he did 2 action learning projects that are very similar to the kind of work that you guys do. You should have a coffee with him, right? And so that intimacy comes through in our career management process in an unprecedented kind of way because our small size in the program. Also, we have people here who have tons of experience. I think our career team, we have someone who's from Malaysia. Naturally, we have myself. I'm heavily involved in the career process. Our deputy director, he's from Korea, but he went to the Kennedy School in Harvard and has worked all over Asia. We have our former director who's now the COO of the business school. She's worked at McKinsey, right? So we have all these individuals who can provide support to our students and a range of perspective as well. So if maybe my style doesn't resonate with you from a career perspective, we can have you talk to our career director, or if his style doesn't resonate, maybe you can talk to our chief operating officer. So I think that's the other thing as well. And we're quickly attuned to saying, okay, I don't think I'm connecting with this guy. Let me turn them over to someone else and see if they can help them a little bit more. The other thing that we've done is, while these relationships are predominantly in Southeast Asia at the regional level and national level, we've also instituted additional career treks beyond Southeast Asia. So last year we did Singapore, but this year we've added Hong Kong and Dubai. And, members of our career staff have deep relationships in both of those markets. And so it's an opportunity to kind of get students, if maybe you're not interested in being in Southeast Asia, maybe these two markets also have some relevance to us. Dubai is kind of the regional hub for the Middle East, Africa emerging world, and Hong Kong is a regional hub for Asia as well. So getting our students more exposure beyond Southeast Asia has also been a priority for us.
So Sean, could you tell us about what you're seeing in terms of student placements for your first graduating class?
All right. Sure, Darren. We were quite happy with our first graduating class and their placement. 80% were placed within the first 90 days of graduation, which our long-term goal, like this upcoming year, is we're targeting 90%, which is on par with top schools. But for our first year, we were really excited about that. Our students worked in a range of different industries. Not really in the first year, we didn't really see that coalesce around one particular industry or function. It was a wide range of things. So we've had people who went to work at McKinsey in the U.S., Walmart, Hilti, Illuma, AirAsia. So it was a mix. And so for us, we're really excited about it. I think one of the things that students think about this part of the world, and what we had to do in the first year was help people understand how the market works in Asia, right? And so sometimes a salary in Asia may be, 60 in like Southeast Asia, maybe like $60,000 US, right? And so for some that might be like, oh wow, that might be less than what they were making in the US, right? But in a place like Indonesia or Vietnam or, Thailand, in purchasing power, that could be, almost twice as much in terms of real dollars, right? And so we had to help get calibrated with students on that. And then also we had to work with recruiters to understand, like, what's an international market expectation. And so one of the things we've done a lot of is benchmarking and getting a sense of where the market is in Southeast Asia or in Hong Kong or in Singapore and, in the U.S. and that kind of thing. Now, for this class, one of the things that we're seeing emerge is that there's definitely interest in digital transformation in this part of the world. E-commerce is blowing up big time, as it's one of the things that it has is its advantage is the cost to deliver is a lot cheaper than, say, the U.S. or Europe, and it's allowing for big retailers to penetrate parts of countries that they could not otherwise penetrate in a scalable way. So that's one thing. And then with China's Belt and Road Initiative, Southeast Asia has, is a fundamental part of that. So supply chain optimization roles are becoming more prevalent in this part of the world. Then for us, the other thing is that the professional services and management consulting industry always values MBA talent. So we've seen a lot of interest in our students in that space. And then, a lot of our students, because of this frontier mindset, have been very appealing to startups and such in this part of the world. So those are the areas that are emerging most for our students.
And could you walk us through kind of how the student visa and employment visa works in Malaysia?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty similar to most other parts of the world. That once you find an employer who wants to sponsor you, then I think everything is it's a pretty easy process. One of the things that happens is you just go through the process. Your company helps sponsor you and puts you through just like it would be in the United States or Hong Kong or that kind of thing. So that doesn't typically tend to be a challenge for the students. I think what is a challenge is that, we've purposely built our career process around the hiring cycle here. And so in Asia, unlike the U.S., hiring can be pretty ad hoc, right? So there's not a process where people come to campus in September, kind of sift through the resumes, conduct interviews, hold info sessions, then everyone gets offers by November. Here, the process, recruiters are only looking like 2 to 3 months out, give or take a few weeks, right? And so a lot of times what we've had to do is plan for that kind of horizon. And so when students will get frustrated because, say, their friends in the U.S. have gotten job offers and things in October or November, it just doesn't happen like that here. And the big hiring cycle starts at the end of Chinese New Year in Asia. And so, and the way this ties to the visa process is that you want to have your students who need visas to work in this part of the world to come out of the Chinese New Year period out of the gate strong and at a sprinter's pace, right? Because advancing the process and being ready at that point really positions you well for employers so that visa doesn't become an issue, right? So it's not so much the company that's an issue. It's about getting the offer in that period around Chinese New Year in March so that you have some time to process the visa, because that can take up to 2 months in this part of the world, right? And so that's the real challenge for folks. So if you come from a place like Nigeria or Pakistan, where, maybe you don't have the same kind of visa reciprocity that, say, as the U.S. does in Malaysia, you have to make sure you're kind of targeting early to get your offer so that you have runway to get your visa in this part of the world. Whereas like an American student or, say, a Canadian student or someone who has a good reciprocity visa relationship with this part of the world, even when their student visa expires, maybe they can leave and come back as a tourist and that kind of thing. That gives them a little bit of flexibility. For countries without that reciprocity, it's really crucial to make sure you start the process early so that you come out of Chinese New Year the strongest.
Now, that is such great insight. And I'll be sure to link to how our listeners can connect with your admissions team. So, if they're from a certain country and they're not sure about that reciprocity agreement with Malaysia, they can get in touch with your team to ask about that. Yeah. And I had one more career question, and that deals with alumni, right? Because you're a young program, so you're not going to have as many alumni, but I'm curious about how your students view that and how you guys view the alumni part of the equation.
Right. So for us, as a young school, we just graduated our first class, and so we've got 40-something alumni.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
But
it's
I
a start.
As a startup, sometimes we have to be industrious and about how we accomplish things and cope with our limitations of age related to our age. And so when students come to the program, they do get MIT alumni affiliate status, and this allows them access to the database and such like that. The other thing that we do is, as part of our career services offering, we provide alumni career services, right? And so for what we lack in like alumni, we don't have a 20-year alumni who are in corner offices and such. Our career team, and when we hire people, we hire people with big-time networks that can kind of supplement or serve as a substitute for the lack of maybe our own alumni having, access to our students having access to ASB-specific alumni. So between the MIT affiliate status and the access to the database, then also the resources that we're providing for our alumni career services, I think that's how we kind of overcome the lack of alumni. I think the other thing that we do is Asia is a much more relational place, particularly for expats, and so it's much easier in this part of the world to like pick up a coffee and talk to someone. And so one of the things in our career trainings that we have workshops and things like that to say, all right, what's your pitch? How do you connect with people who who you don't know? How do you make a cold introduction and that kind of thing? And because we're small and intimate, there have been many times, like me or our career team, we sit down with the students, we help them craft a cold intro email to get close to someone that they may want to meet in order to provide perspective on a career role, a career path, or maybe it's an opportunity within an organization and that kind of thing. And so these are ways that we compensate for our youth and our lack of a critical mass of alumni.
Yeah, and I also think, as you guys are kind of like a startup in a sense, that there is this sort of energy that's associated with that. I mean, I remember when we graduated our first class at SMU, where I used to work, like those graduates were so excited about the program and, wanted the program to succeed, obviously. So I think there's also an element of responsiveness and passion too, especially in those first couple classes, that hopefully, your students can benefit from. Because, a lot of great programs are, 5 years old, 10 years old, whether that's a company culture or organization or business school or Y Combinator or examples like that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so the other thing too is that, being in Malaysia, one of the things that we're also doing to kind of compensate for that is, capitalizing, like you said, on the energy of recent graduates, but then also partnering and doing different kind of activities that kind of, maybe we're not bringing together alums, but maybe we're bringing together a community of people and stakeholders who are vested in the success of ASB, right? And so, one of the things we did recently was work with one of the leading telecom providers to conduct a datathon. And that has given us access to a whole nother analytics community that we would have not otherwise had access to. Or, myself and the dean and our other associate dean, we all routinely speak and conduct events in different places in Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and globally that gets us access to things. And so, this access that our leadership team is cultivating through their engagement in many different things, along with, I talked about the action learning. I would say everyone is engaged in, broader stakeholder community for ASB, and our students have connections to things that other schools may not have at this stage. And because of we talked about the energy from our alums being a new school, but a lot of our partners are really excited about working with us because they really are bought into action learning. They're really bought into this new concept. They're really brought into the idea that there's this world-class business school that's outside of your kind of traditional hubs in Asia, right there on the frontier. And so that gets us a lot of, it opens a lot of doors for us. And we're just looking for students to help us capitalize on those potential opportunities.
I think that's a great place to end our conversation, Sean. Thank you so much for being just so open and candid with, what's going on at ASB and what you guys are looking for and what you're trying to do there. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Darren. We really appreciate it, and let us know if we can ever be of help in the future. All right?
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.